Well, thank you for showing up today. We tried to get the word out. Some of you probably did come expecting to hear about the Marquis de Lafayette and his carriage and his tour of North America as it was. I hope you find something interesting about the unique buildings in Marshall County. This is the second half of the brown bag that I did a year ago. I had too many architectural gems and not enough time. So just to catch you up if you weren't here, or to refresh your memory if you were, I'm going to do a little short review and then move on. So if you were here and you remember it all, I apologize that I'm kind of repeating myself here. And I have to tell you up front, I'm not an architect. That is not something I am skilled at. However, I have an appreciation for the beautiful, historic, and sometimes odd buildings that grace our fair county. I started collecting information about buildings because we were doing sidewalk and tram tours for a while. And I got a good bit of information from local architect Kurt Garner. I know some of you know Kurt. He very patiently answered all my questions and delivered a short course in architectural features and history. He even gave me a book about architectural styles. I think he was hoping that I would just consult the book instead of bugging him all the time. But anyway, many thanks to Kurt. He is a great resource. So the logical place to start is with our courthouse. In Marshall County, it's one of the most outstanding buildings. It was completed in 1872. The architect was a guy named Gurdon P. Randall of Chicago. The cost at the time was $109,254. Now, in today's dollars, thank you, Google, in today's dollars, that would be about $2,901,285. That's more than 26 times the original cost. It has been renovated several times in the intervening years, most recently a few years ago when they rebuilt the clock tower. It's truly a mix of architectural styles, which reminds me to tell you what Kurt told me, is that buildings are built and paid for by people, all of whom have particular ideas about what they like. Architects and contractors are employees who generally aim to please. So strict adherence to a particular architectural style is much rarer than a mix of elements that somehow makes up a whole. Our courthouse has some features of neoclassical design, like the triangular pediments above the doors and the Corinthian columns, and some features of Victorian design, such as the tall windows with the ornamental hoods over the tops. That wonderful clock tower blends elements of several styles, and it defies pigeonholing altogether, this building. And in fact, since the latest update, it also defies pigeons, which you might be glad to know. Yeah. We're not going to stay just in Plymouth, but I have to talk a bit about the current home of the Marshall County Historical Society. Really, it's 3 buildings, and I'm just going to talk about the corner building. You're in the middle building, and of course, the research library is in the south building. That building started out in 1910 as the new home of a long-standing men's store, a haberdashery called Lauer Brothers. And some of you remember when Lauer's was here, yeah. The Lauer's sold it in 1980 or something, 1982. And we bought it in 1992 and renovated, the Historical Society did. The building is neoclassical. It was designed by Jacob Ness. an architect who's responsible for several of our downtown buildings. He had a bit of a reputation in the region, and went on to bigger towns and built things in bigger places. You know, a neoclassical building by the symmetrically balanced windows and a center door. You'll notice in the picture, the door is right in the middle, okay? Which is a change from the way it is now. That door has been moved probably during a 1960s remodel. Another clue to the neoclassical design is the rectangular windows. And usually they have 9-pane uppers, so that's a neoclassical feature of architecture. And the boxed eave, you know, with the overhang at the top of the building, triangular pediments above the doors, and the roof line. So now you can amaze your friends and family and tell them, oh, it's got a triangular piece up there, it must be a neoclassical building. The ground floor and basement were used for the men's store, while the second floor was rental space for business offices. The door on the south end, which is, now it's the way up to the train room, but before it was the way you got to the second floor. Moses Lauer ran the store. His brother Leopold had law offices that were on the second floor. There were many, many other tenants, including Dr. Charles Welch, who was a dentist, a Dr. Schaff, who had one of Marshall County's very first X-ray machines. Very cutting edge for that time period. Matter of fact, the story goes that people used to just go up there and pay for an X-ray because they wanted to see the inside. Which to me, you know, they didn't know better. They didn't know. But can you imagine how much radiation went into those people for no reason? Nowadays, we hope that doesn't happen, but you know, it was a big deal. Pickle Smith had an office up there. He was the Heinz pickle agent. So if you were going to grow pickles, grow cucumbers, you had to see him. And Dr. Aspinall, who was the Pennsylvania Railroad doctor. The city of Plymouth, like most other towns in Marshall County and beyond, has experienced a number of major downtown fires that took out several buildings all at once. So it stands to reason that wooden buildings so close together and heating with wood, or later on they had coal stoves, and even later lighting with natural gas, they would be subject to fire. Consequently, local ordinances were set in place that insisted that new buildings be brick and that the brick be in firewalls between the buildings. So we've had some major downtown fires, but they haven't taken out a whole block like they used to. And it fundamentally changed the character of downtown areas in small towns and large. Do you recognize this building? If you were here last year, you probably do, because that's one that I featured last year because it's so interesting. It looks nothing like that now. It was a 3-story, 3-bay building built by Amzie Wheeler, one of the oldest remaining downtown buildings this is. As a matter of fact, it was built in 1865 on plot number 1 in the city of Plymouth. And it's plot number 1 according to the plat map that was developed in 1837. This picture shows a soldier's funeral coming around the corner, although probably not a Civil War funeral. The light post suggests that it was possibly early gas lights, or maybe even electrification, but it could have been the funeral of a Civil War veteran. It looks as though it's military of some kind, because you can see the flag-draped coffin. probably the reason that this picture was made at all had to do with the sign on the building. I don't know, you probably can't see that very well because it's sort of sideways, but it says Johnson Brothers Furniture and Funeral Services. Because of course, back in that day, the furniture dealer was also the undertaker in many cases. I don't exactly know why. I suppose it had to do with building coffins. We know this building today as the Reese Theater. I know, right? It got a complete overhaul, including an entirely new facade in 1939 when Stuart Reese bought 2 of the 3 storefront bays. Gutted the inside, took off the 3rd floor. I think there'd been a fire up there, so he just took off the 3rd floor, installed a new Art Deco front, and created a 1,000 square foot luxury apartment above the auditorium. It's really cool. Yes, it is. If you've not been up there, I know that something's going up there eventually. So, you know, stay tuned. Movies were shown there until 2007. Now, of course, the building has reopened as an event center. Beautiful restoration. The buildings that now, we're moving on. The building that now houses the Chamber of Commerce and the city offices were originally built as one big 3-bay building in 1879. It was a huge Italianate structure with a facade that was dominated by wrought iron details. It looked like this. Ooh. Isn't that a pretty building? The original building was built for Marcus A.O. Packard, a local lawyer and a politician who also founded the First National Bank, for which he commissioned this building. In 1916, the original Italianate facade was covered over on the 2 northern bays with a limestone and granite neoclassical facade. The style of the day favored those things. 1910, across the street, neoclassical building. 1916, that building took on a neoclassical facade. It was supposed to mean strength and confidence and permanence, but apparently more than a brick and iron building, which to me seems like it would also suggest those qualities. The 1916 architect, no surprise, Jacob Ness, the same guy who built the Lauer building. In addition to the bank and A.O. Packard's law offices, the first long-distance telephone office was in that building. Tanner Drug Store was in that building until 1956, from 1900 to 1956. The building was donated to the city in 1975 and has housed the city offices ever since then. Here's a look at the 2 facades together. Wow. It's quite different. If you want to see the evidence, though, of the original building, if you think I'm not telling you the truth, take a minute to look at the Garrow Street side of the building. I often tell people, if you really want to see if you really want to see the original building, don't look on the street level, look at the 2nd floor of buildings, because usually the storefronts have been changed, they're aluminum and glass and all that, but up above, they maintain their original character. And the same is true with the side of the building. Generally speaking, they don't spend money taking care of the side of the building. It doesn't matter. What matters is the front. This is one of the most interesting buildings in downtown. It was built in 1929. Once again, Jacob Ness built this building. It's not neoclassical, however. It's what's called Beaux-Arts in style. It was built as the first retail outlet for Montgomery wards in the whole country. It opened 3 days before the stock market crashed. Somehow, it survived the Great Depression. The design of the building became the standard for their chain of stores. There are lots of former Montgomery Ward stores that have that look, that same facade. It featured high on the center bay, a framed low-relief sculpture called the Spirit of Progress, which became an early Montgomery Ward's trademark. It was truly state-of-the-art, featuring a pneumatic tube system that sent orders and receipts and other paperwork from department to department. The building is currently home to Heartland Artists, and we could not be happier about that. It really deserves the kind of care that Heartland Artists can do. And that's a more recent picture. And I wanted to show you this because I wanted you to get a better look at that beautiful facade and the Spirit of Progress at the top. The sculpted top, the color panels, rounded corner windows, and the glazed tile are all Beaux-Arts, which preceded the Art Deco craze in the 1930s. So it wasn't a real long period of time that Beaux-Arts was the style that was, most common, but it really led into Art Deco pretty nicely. If there is one particular feature that the town of Bourbon is famous for, it probably is beautiful brick homes and churches. If you've driven down Main Street in Bourbon, many beautiful brick homes. There are several up and down Main Street, but I chose this church built in 1914 because its style is Gothic revival. The square towers that flank the front gable have castellated parapets, which is typical of Gothic revival. It's that look. A third tower on the side is also castellated. The gables and the pointed arches are meant to point heavenward, and the stepped buttresses and stone details lend to the building's air of permanence. Originally left open, the bell tower's windows are now covered by wooden louvered panels. The south end of the building, which is on the left side of the photo, has a flat roof there. It was designed as the church parsonage, and that flat roof porch was the porch of the parsonage. Many of the stained glass windows have transoms, presumably to allow for airflow during hot summer months. And the two stepped windows on the north side of the entry tower, I don't know if you can see those two windows right there are offset like that. That's because there's a staircase in there. That's the staircase tower. This Bourbon home, completed in 1881 for Isaac B. and Ruth Arnold, is a brick Queen Anne style home. Once termed a palatial mansion, and it was the first house in Marshall County with steam heat and gas lights. You see the front-facing gable with the spindlework at the top and the small second-story porch, the bay window and the big fancy porch. Those details and many more are typical of Queen Anne. You pretty much know a Queen Anne house when you see it. They just have a really unique style. They're always sort of asymmetrical, unlike the neoclassical where everything is all lined up. Queen Anne, there'll be a tower on one side, a bay window on the other side, the porch may be off to one side. All that is Queen Anne. The home's exterior is made of pressed brick, which reportedly was imported from Ohio, which is kind of odd because Bourbon at the time made bricks. And that was one of their industries. was bricks in addition to lumber. They did a lot of lumber back then too. The original roof was made of tricolored slate roof caps, and the house has a full basement and attic. 14 finished rooms. Well, think about the cleaning there, ladies and gentlemen. And the finished rooms had 11-foot ceilings on the first and second floors. The woodwork throughout is butternut. I had to ask somebody about butternut because I didn't really know what that was. We don't have butternut anymore in terms of lumber. Maybe somebody does somewhere, but I guess butternut was a kind of a walnut tree. And it was hard and beautiful. So lots and lots of woodwork was made from butternut right around the turn of the last century. So much, I guess, that we ran out of trees, butternut trees. So the home includes pocket doors, which are classic Queen Anne details, 2 elaborate slate fireplaces, as well as the bay window with the intricate window frames. This is a beautiful house. A few years ago, we had a Christmas tour in Bourbon around Christmas time, and it was wonderful to see the insides of some of these houses. Well, Argus made its mark on the county in the early 20th century with the National Retail Hardware Association. Melvin Lake Corey, who owned a hardware store in Argus, became the secretary of that organization. And it was a powerful force in the hardware business in the early 1900s, largely due to Mr. Corey. I guess he had a talent for that. He brought the association's headquarters to Argus, and they built this building, which is still there. But it lost its upper floor somewhere along the way. And you can see it's not nearly as imposing as it was. And once again, it's kind of neoclassical, with a few details that are not neoclassical. But once again, buildings are built by people who have their own ideas. The NRHA headquarters, in turn, sparked a housing boom of that era that included many of the beautiful craftsman homes, featuring the stonework porches and chimneys. If you've ever just driven down Michigan Street in Argus, you can't help but notice that they have a lot of stone porches and chimneys. That's because of Mr. Corey, who brought a lot of executives of his association into Argus. And they built these bungalows as executive homes. Craftsmen, or arts and crafts style bungalows, feature low-pitched gabled roofs with wide enclosed eave overhangs with the rafters usually exposed. They have full or partial width porches with a roof supported by tapered square columns that go clear to the ground. The windows are generally multi-pane sash windows. William Lake Foker, there he is, William Foker, was the most accomplished of several stonemasons working in the Argus community. And in our area, all over Marshall County, around the turn of the 20th century. Born in Plymouth, Foker moved to Argus as a child and eventually went to work as a plasterer and a bricklayer. Accounts from his daughter Edna state that he read newspaper articles about the construction of a mansion in South Bend, employing French stonecutters, and decided to go up and watch them. Now, I don't know what mansion that was, but I kind of like to think it might have been Copshahome or the Oliver Mansion, Studebaker, somebody. Foker stayed several weeks in South Bend, observing the technique of cutting and assembling color in the walls of the new mansion. And he began working in both cut and uncut stone, which he harvested from farmers' fields around Argus. I never picked rocks in a field, but I've had friends who told me every spring that was something that the whole family did. was walk along in the fields and pick rock that had come up from the, I guess, the middle of the earth, I don't know. But Fokker used that. He used that kind of stone. No full record of his work has been compiled. I keep hoping that somebody will clean out a basement or something and bring us all of his receipts from all of the buildings that he built or something, because it would sure be nice to know where all those buildings are. But several characteristics of Fokker's work make it identifiable. One such trait is the tapered appearance of porch walls. That middle picture there is a porch, I guess what they call a pier, giving the illusion of a naturally occurring pile of stones. Another is his skill in blending a variety of colors and his unique ability to fit cut stones very tightly together. Fokker nearly always placed a pudding stone in his stonework. A pudding stone is usually white quartz with red jasper streaks or spots in it. And that bottom picture there is a pudding stone. While a good deal of Fokker's work is concentrated in Argus, his talent propelled his career to many places outside the county. He built some walls for a cemetery in Chicago. I know there's a lot of his work around the state, especially in the upper part of the state. Sometimes he would go away for 2 or 3 months away from his family and stay somewhere and build buildings. What you are looking at here is the home that William Fokker built for his own family. He began planning the construction in 1912, and it was nearly 5 years before the family moved in. He gathered the stone while traveling all over northern Indiana. Some consider this cut stone house to be the crowning achievement of his career. It's really beautiful, isn't it? One of the stones were so varied that the whole house is constructed without any two similar stones touching each other. One of the features of the chimney is that the two halves of one stone are sometimes placed opposite each other. But the most striking feature of Fokker's masonry, found in almost all of his chimneys, are his trademark patterns of the Wheel of Life and the Star of Hope, which are both in that stonework. The Wheel of Life is the one on the bottom, and if you go up into the gable, that round red stone is the middle of the Star of Hope. And both of those things reflected his philosophical beliefs. They are very prominent in the chimney of his own house. There's some other things up there too. There's a bird up there that he created out of stonework. And he liked to put pointed stones at the top of his chimneys. And you can kind of see that there a little bit. It's not that visible. And if you've been to Argus, I'm sure you've seen that house. It's on Highway 10, which goes through Argus. It also known as Walnut Street. Built in 1923 through 1926, the actual stonework was accomplished by another stone mason, Harmon Lowmaw, but he was under Fokker's direct guidance. The master was getting up in years by then, and the craftsman bungalow sports Oriental influence details, such as the unique roof lines. Trellis porch off to one side is another feature of that, and a row of 3 or more windows on the second floor. So it is a bungalow style home, but back in the day they called that the Oriental influence. The builder of the house had been to California and saw this and liked it and brought it back to build his own house. Mr. Lowmaw must have been a good student, because this home is an example of William Fokker's best stacked rock design, having the stones placed very close together to minimize the need for much mortar. They don't have much mortar. I've been up close and personal to that house, and there's hardly any mortar between those stones, and they've been there since 1926. The massive boulders, the biggest ones, are placed at the bottom, with increasingly smaller stones up to the top. The tapered porch supports and the pointed stones at the chimney are Fokker details. Once again, you can't really see that top of that chimney, but the stones are pointed up there. The house has been owned since the early 1950s by the Vanderweel family. Many Argus kids remember playing hide the penny on that porch, on and around the porch. If you're interested in Fokker and some more of his work, you can pick up a booklet out front about the Fokker stonework. Moving on to Bremen, the Dietrich family is responsible for more than one beautiful and unique building, but we're going to just focus on the most well-known one. Peter Dietrich was the man who had the house built. Some of us might know this as the Bowen House. The Bowen family lived there in the mid-century, and Dr. Otis Bowen had his practice there before he became governor of Indiana. Otis Bowen was famous in Marshall County before he was famous in the state, before he was famous on the national scene. All reports indicate that Dr. Bowen delivered 3,000 or so babies in his time as a general physician in Bremen. Then he became the governor of Indiana, and then he was the Secretary of Health and Human Services for Ronald Reagan during his administration. But this large 3-story house is important because it is a wonderful surviving example, once again, of the Queen Anne style of architecture, with its irregular projections, its circular turrets, porches with gabled roofs. Peter Dietrich had the house built in 1900, a fitting residence for a prominent citizen of Bremen, but he ended up selling the house in 1922 to Frank L. Thomas, who sold it to Doc Bowen in 1953. It has recently been under renovation that is continuing. I'm including some pictures of the wonderful original architecture features of the interior. Elaborate woodwork that has been very well cared for and is still stunning and unusual. We visited as a museum staff. We had a little in-service over there in Bremen, and we visited this house in 1922. I'm pretty well preserved.
Yeah.
In 2022, when the renovation was still near its beginning. I'm sure it's much farther along now, but look at the woodwork. If you notice, the spindles on the stairway are different styles. You know, they're not all one style going up the stairs, and that was intentional. That's not an add later kind of a thing. That was original. And the fretwork in the window there, beautiful details. The hummingbird lamp sits on the newel post that goes upstairs. It's just a stunning, stunning house. Straight lines and austere simplicity of this art moderne building anchor it in 1948. In the 40s, this was a popular style. It's a former American Legion Hall. The building honors Otho B. Place, a Bremen native who was killed in the Argonne Forest of France during World War I. Squared pieces of limestone, known as ashlars, there's a vocabulary word for you, ashlar, are laid in straight rows and provide characteristic horizontal lines and rectangles, while the tall glass block windows mimic the shape of the chimney and provide multiple vertical lines and rectangles. Highlights include a date block on the southwest corner and the American Legion emblems that are carved in limestone on the west and south walls. Last I knew, this building was a church, but I'm not sure. I haven't looked lately, so I don't know if that church is still there. This house, this next house, is remarkable both for its commonness and its uniqueness. Also built in 1900, it appears to be a simple turn-of-the-century gable front and wing house. You know, so it would be the gable front and then a wing going out one side. And it's had a lot of renovation. However, it was a typical home. The style of it was built with little regard for changing architectural styles, usually just meant to provide basic shelter, constructed of whatever materials were handy. Brick, timber, rock, whatever. If you had it, you might have built your house with that. Take a good look at this one though. Although not confirmed, it seems likely that the unique brick and stone patchwork pattern was created by Johann Eicher, the first recorded owner of the house, who made his living as a stonemason. The 15 by 18 inch black and white squares show a high level of precision, and the patches of stonework are book matched. You know, like this, they're book matched. The porch, the brick flower planter, and some other details probably added later. And perhaps Mr. Eicher considered his house to be the good advertisement for his talent. And it's really unique. There's not another one built like that I know of. It really shows precision. This building is now gone.
Yes.
But some of you recognize it. Yes. Mm-hmm. It certainly defies architectural style, but uniquely, it is one of several. You know, you think that Bremen had the only coffee pot, but they didn't. I just saw a picture of one that existed in Scottsburg, and the people who built this one got the idea from somebody else. It was built out of a silo. It was the coffee pot, restaurant, and filling station. It was located east of Bremen on US Route 6. It was built in 1932 by Elmer Laudeman after one he saw in Popular Mechanics magazine. It was 18 feet in diameter with a round countertop in the center. It was a popular stop for truckers because it was midway between Illinois and Ohio, and because it was open around the clock. It was demolished in 1978 to make way for the Bremen bypass. But it lives on in the memories of many, and we have great pictures of it. We also have a booklet on Bremen architecture, if you want to pick that one up. They're free of charge, just pick one up. You can kind of see the silo. Yeah. As with any town in the county, I could probably do a whole brown bag just on the buildings in Culver. The history of those lake cottages, don't you just want to know more? Well, me too. I don't know enough about those cottages to talk about them. But I have some information, a little bit of information. Those lake cottages are a brown bag all by themselves, but we'll have to ask the Reverend John back there if he wants to do one, or Jeff Kinney on the cottages. Yeah. I've chosen just a few buildings based mostly on their architectural style and the history of them. This first one is a great example of neoclassical architecture. Not surprising, it was built in 1907 and 1908. It is the Osborne Hotel. And before you have a chance to wonder, it is no longer standing. Ironic, since neoclassical style emphasizes permanence and strength. Once again, you can recognize the style by the symmetrical lines. Center doorways, plain rectangular windows in neat rows, triangular parapets on the roof line somewhere. This 36-room hotel and restaurant checked all of those boxes. It is truly neoclassical. It was located on the northwest corner of Jefferson and Ohio Streets, for those who know Culver. Currently, it's a vacant lot just north of the CVS, across Jefferson Street from the CVS. It served as a residential hotel for a while, but progressively fell into disrepair. It was demolished in 1990. Like with many old and venerable buildings, everybody wanted it to be saved, but nobody came forward with the cash to make it happen. A longtime Culver resident and historian, once again, Dr. Houghton back there, told me that the Osborne building started out on a different lot as a school building, correct?
It's, what's now Ohio Street wasn't a street, and the school building was farther up Ohio Street. They moved it down half a block and made it into a hotel.
Yeah, yeah. So a big building like that was moved and expanded to become the Osborne. Well, this newspaper, that newspaper picture is not wonderful. It does kind of tell a story, though. It must have been a cold and windy January day when they started to demolish it. And the windows are all gone now, but they didn't take the curtains down. Yeah, you can see the demolition going on there. And the caption of the picture says, "It's curtains for the Osborne." Really? Yeah, and you can see through those open windows, that's the post office in Culver across there. Now, this is the
Kreitzberger.
Kreitzberger, thank you. I asked her that once before and then forgot. The Kreitzberger Park and Saloon. See the railroad track there? It was constructed in 1894 on the shore of Lake Maxinkuckee, close to the Vandalia Railroad line. It boasted some additional amenities like sleeping rooms and a bowling alley. It was converted into a rooming house about 1907 when the town of Culver went dry. You know, people misinterpret when Prohibition started, because many counties and towns went alcohol-free before Prohibition started. And Culver did that in 1907. The structure is basically Italianate, with those tall capped windows and wide overhanging eaves, but the builder clearly added his own flair with the peaked front dormer. Peaked front dormers are not usually part of an Italianate style, and the massive front porch is what I meant to say. It was handy to the railroad, so undoubtedly it was busy there. Now here is a recent picture of it. It's now a private home, and really, really beautiful. I guess that's an example of an old building that somebody did want to save and did put the money into to do it. Some folks might know Culver Military Academy suffered a devastating fire early in its history. In 1895, the whole academy was housed in one old hotel building, and the stack of the steam heater caught fire. The building was completely destroyed. Luckily, the building and the contents were insured, and no one was hurt. The insurance payment was a whopping $5,000. 43 students were instantly rendered homeless, but took up residence in the elegant summer home of Mr. and Mrs. Culver, which you see here. It's a terrible picture, but it's the one we have, so. It's a spacious Queen Anne house on the shores of Lake Maxinkuckee. Construction of the new brick and steel academy building started almost immediately, possibly hurried along by Mrs. Culver having 43 boys as house guests. I raised 2, and that was enough. Culver folks might think this building looks rather familiar. That wouldn't be surprising. This is Herstbonso Castle, dating from the 15th century, and it exists in East Sussex, England. That's hard to say, East Sussex, England. The significance for us today is that the Culver Legion building, the Legion Memorial Building on the campus of the Culver Academies, is patterned after that castle. It was dedicated in 1924 as a monument to the Culver men who served and died in World War I. And it soon became the campus library. However, it reached its book capacity in 1980, and now it houses mostly offices. As Henry Culver and his colleagues undertook rebuilding, they chose this loosely Gothic style, but without the high towers and the steeply pitched roofs. Instead, they chose the militaristic castellations that you see across the top of that flat roof. Many of the campus buildings have a similar militaristic tone, such as the Vaughan Equestrian Center, which was built in 1917. You can clearly see the resemblance to the Herstbonso Castle in the oldest of the academy buildings. Now you know some local trivia. You can march out on trivia night. This terrible old photo is of the Allegheny House. It was built in 1855 and has no particular style. It was just put up for utilitarian purposes by Abraham Bogardus. It's on 18B Road in the Village of Maxinkuckee. Been there since 1855. It is still there. It featured sleeping rooms. It had a second floor ballroom for dances and parties. It was one of the most important buildings in the village because of its proximity to the lake. Maxinkuckee Landing was the low ground at the west end of 18B Road. It had docks for boats from which visitors arrived. Its only short uphill trek to the hotel. There's another picture of it from the side. And it was considered a vacation spot. This photo obviously was taken later. In fact, Allegheny House has been credited as being the beginning of the tourist trade around Lake Maxinkuckee. The former hotel is now a private dwelling. It is remarkable that this building is still standing. It's a wood frame structure of advanced age. So, you know, I'm delighted that it's still there. This is the only school building I'm going to show you. It is the La Paz School. And I wanted to show it to you for a couple of reasons. The original part of the building, which is to the far left in this photo, was built in 1908 and provided the basics in public school education for all students. It was a typical 3-story, 4-square brick structure. And like many of the schools of that era, was built much like a factory would have been in 1908. Functional, no frills. But it did have more windows than a turn-of-the-century factory would have had. A high school addition was added in 1928, and again was patterned, like many school buildings were, after a 1928 factory. Functional, no frills. Once again, though, it did have more windows than a factory would have. When the high school building went up, the original building became an elementary school. The La Paz school closed in 1984 and was torn down in 1986. While older school buildings might have some charm, you know, we always hate to see those old school buildings. Webster School, Washington School, you know, we hate to see them go down. However, there's a reason. We tend to be sentimental about them, but it's certainly true that current school safety standards grew out of mostly fire disasters that plagued old buildings like these. And, but that is yet another brown bag. I am including these two buildings, not because they're architecturally perfect or anything like it, but because they were both strategically located at the intersection of US 31 and Route 6. Both buildings were basically the same style with their side gable construction. No particular style at all, but they fed a lot of people. In 1949, the Garner family traded their farm in Tyner for the inn, the Garner Inn. It stood roughly where McDonald's is now. The Dixiana across the street, it actually is across the intersection. It's like on the other side. Had cabins, so that was a big place for truckers to stay. And they had hot meals. Both establishments were vital to the area in a time when nobody had ever heard of fast food. I guess, you know, if your chicken was running real fast, that was fast food. Incidentally, the Dixiana building was moved to a location on 2A Road and is still occupied as a single-family home. I've included this house in the Tyner area. Anybody have a guess as to why this is an important house? It's a Sears house. It's a Sears kit house, available from about 1908 to 1942. Sears offered a catalog with a variety of blueprints at many price points that could be purchased along with the building supplies. So you could order your home out of the Sears catalog. They came by rail to the homeowner, who could either choose to build the house himself or to hire a contractor to do that. One of the most fascinating parts of the story is that the framing lumber was pre-cut and it was all labeled, allowing the builder, whether it was the homeowner or a professional, to follow an instruction booklet to organize the process, kind of like a giant-sized Lego kit. Included in the kit were all the elements needed for the house, from lumber to roofing, wiring, plumbing, doors and windows, down to the doorknobs, hinges, nails, screws, staircases, flooring, bathtubs, sinks, faucets, every little thing. And you could go with the basics or choose an upgrade. These were not modular homes at all. They were stick-built. Sears was not the only business that sold kit houses, very likely the largest. There are many kit houses still around, and they were sold all over the country in several foreign countries. By the way, if you think you might own a kit house, a Sears kit house, there's some simple ways to find out. And there are several websites that can help you. One of the easiest ways, if you don't have a mortgage or a deed, which would also list that information, a building permit listing or blueprints sometimes are available. But you can just pry off a piece of trim around a doorway or take off crown molding and look for a Sears shipping label. All the lumber has shipping labels on the back. The house you're looking at was called a Maywood model, and in the late 1920s, it retailed for about $2,700. That's about almost $50,000 in today's dollars. That may seem like it's still a great deal, but remember, it's just the parts, not the labor. And it doesn't include the price of the land either. Here's another example of a kit house. That's a Sears kit house. Manassas Yoder built this kit house in 1925. It arrived on the B&O Railroad. It's located on Plymouth Goshen Trail, and it represents a different style choice from the first one. The stone and brick porch was probably added later. And I wanted to point out that the car that's sitting there isn't exactly, I mean, the picture was taken with the car in it in a much later time than the car would indicate. As far as I know, they didn't have color photography back then. That's what I have for you today, and we're just a couple minutes after 1. Thank you for your kind attention to my ramblings. There are many, many more interesting houses. These are just a few. If you feel like you have a house with a history, you can stop in our research library sometime, because we may have some information on your house. Sometimes people bring us abstracts, and the abstract of your house tells us an awful lot. So come by if you think you have a historic house, and we'll look it up for you. Thank you.